week 23. We're going to be talking about social studies and history. This is the Ready to Homeschool 6-month countdown. You can print off the PDF document from www.hilarioushomeschooling.com. We just have a few more weeks to go, and it's been a lot of fun to put this together. I hope it's helpful to you. So history is what we think of when we talk about the things that happened in the past. And oftentimes history was a part of a child's education 100 years ago. Social studies, not so much. Social studies is now something that surrounds the study of people and interactions with people and civilizations and cultures. And there's a lot of different facets to it. So social studies is something that has kind of creeped in on history. And not in a bad way, just that there's so many more things to study now that more people have come up with theories, and psychology and all of those things have blossomed in the last 150 years. So there's just more things to talk about in this realm. So social studies and history is a very large umbrella. And usually we study history in chronological order. We can also talk about how the people of the past have reacted to their circumstances and their environment, depending on where they lived. Like if they lived in a desert, they're going to have a different culture than if they lived near an ocean. So you can talk about, this is just a basic understanding of people, how people live differently depending on what their geography is, but then also their circumstances. If they were living during the time of a plague or a war, their lives are going to be very different. And so they're going to react differently. But this is great because you can use heroes from history or villains from history to show your kids that real people have had to make choices based on their circumstances, and this has built their character. So you can use history as a study of people from the past who you want your children to use as an example, either good or bad, in their future. So I just have a list of things that all go into this category that you could study under the umbrella of social studies and history. We have geography, which is the study of the world, maps, places. We have government, political science, and law. We have civics and citizenship, anthropology, archaeology. Archaeology is finding out how we know what we know about peoples of the past. And some kids get really fascinated with the idea of digging through people's garbage to find out what clues there are about those people and how they lived. Economics would be how people paid each other or bartered for goods. Sociology, culture, and culture is very all-encompassing. It's all the different things that are define a people group. And culture is different based on what people value, what people think is important in their life will affect their culture. Religion, personal identity and psychology. And just be aware that in social studies and history, we are teaching content that means a huge body of knowledge, times, places, dates, people, all of those things. This is a lot of information that just needs to be memorized and understood in story-like form. But we're also teaching skills, the way of thinking like a historian, what a historian might be interested in finding out, or where they look for documents, or how they interview people to get more information about something. So social studies doesn't just have to be a list of boring topics or things to memorize. Social studies can also be learning new skills and learning how to think like the experts in this field as well. So there's a idea in homeschool curriculum that the people who have written history curriculum have put it out into a rotation so that you can go through history in 4 years. They start with creation through ancient Greece and Rome. Then they do medieval history. And then they do part 1 of American history and part 2 of American history. And so every 4 years, you can start over and go through history all over again. Now, I put that down on your paper here so that you can see that 1, 2, 3, and 5 are what those years would be. In our family, we inserted 2 optional years and made it a 6-year rotation. I like to study pioneer history using Prairie Primer because I love Little House on the Prairie books. So we do that for a whole year. And when we get to the end of modern history, we put in a year of Eastern Hemisphere geography. So the countries of Africa, Asia, Antarctica, and Australia. You wouldn't have to do those. That's just something we've done in our family. And so we end up doing a 6-year rotation. So all of our kids then went through the history cycle twice. When I was in college, I got to learn history side by side with culture, the humanities like art, music, literature, architecture, religion. When I saw how history was taught this way, I wanted to give this to my kids, my future kids. I wanted to teach this way. I wanted to be able to use history as our driving force and then pull in the literature of those people, the art of those people, the music of those people, and see how all of those things contribute to your understanding of that time period and the people who lived then. I didn't grow up learning history that way, but once I saw it done that way, I had to use that method going forward from then, and I haven't regretted it. And fortunately, the way that history curriculum is written for homeschool families, oftentimes those are all pulled together. If they're not, you can do it. There's ways that you can find those resources and pull in those concepts and tie them in together. I highly recommend that you use timelines and maps when you're doing history studies. This will help visually represent the time period you're studying and where it happened. History was real. History happened to real people at real places at real times. And so putting those things on a globe and on a timeline helps your kids understand more about their place in the world and about how all of these things chronologically happened. So there's many, many, many ways you can do timelines. They don't have to be a big strip of paper on a wall. They can be in a 3-ring binder that has things that fold out, or even just a 3-ring binder that you just keep a page for every century. So that's something you can research a little more. And the same with maps. You don't have to have a giant wall map if you don't have that much room in your house. You can get smaller maps that you can fold out just for your lesson. It is an extra step, an extra thing that you have to do, but it is helpful for your kids to learn places and times by doing those extra steps. Okay, so let's go through how the overview would be for teaching your kids at home. Throughout the preschool years, they are just starting to learn that the world doesn't revolve around them. And so there's really not much you need to do about history. Some little kids get very excited about learning, like let's say about castles, or maybe some kids are really into like one of the wars. And so you might have a kid with a very strong obsession on one of those things. And so they are going to learn history by themselves, even at a very young age like that. But otherwise, you don't really need to do much to encourage history at that stage. There's a lot of other things that their time would be better spent on. But do just try to help them understand that there are other people in their community and that other people lived a long time ago. When you get into the early elementary years, that's when you can start branching out a little bit more. In public school now, they like to do things like community helpers, like visiting fire stations and talking about jobs and occupations, and those are great. I really liked doing a study on the 50 states when my kids were really little. I think Nathan and Amelia were like maybe kindergarten and preschool when we tackled learning all 50 states and kind of doing a workbook that gave them a few facts about each of the 50 states. We didn't have a lot of time to travel that year, but it was fun to kind of give them an idea of the place that we were living, Iowa, and then all the states that were all around it, because Iowa is kind of in the middle of the country. You could also research your family tree at this stage, and that helps them start to think about people who lived before them and how they were connected to history. Sometimes you find out that an ancestor was in a certain war, or that an ancestor immigrated from a different country. And so that starts giving you a natural way to talk about geography and history just by doing your own research for a family tree. If you would like, at this age in the early elementary years, you could start doing a history rotation, and you don't have to start at the beginning. If your family is more interested in American history, you can start there in year 3. There might be a few gaps because they don't understand what happened before American history, but remember, you're going to be coming back to that year. Every 4 to 6 years, your family's going to cycle back through those things. Also, I wanted to put in here that a Google Earth is a fun thing to do at early elementary years. It is on the computer or on an app, and you end up just kind of being like, when you first start the app, the world is pictured like it would be from outer space. And so then you pick a place on the Earth, and it's almost like your spaceship is coming in to land on that particular place. And you can start to explore it using Google Earth. And so my kids really enjoy doing this. And if they heard of a place in the news, they would just go to Google Earth and see if they could find out where that was. So it's a very, very intuitive way to learn geography. And because it's on the computer, a lot of kids really enjoy that. So that is a great resource. Okay, as you get into the later elementary and the middle school years, you should definitely be somewhere in a history rotation, going through one of those 4 years that are listed in bold up above. It is also a really good time to memorize countries. With an outline map, you can start to help them understand where all the different countries are in the world and start writing those out. During the high school and college years, students generally are required to have 3 years of social studies and or history during their high school years. And specifically, they need 1 full year of American history and 1/2 of a year of American government. Now, schools and states may vary slightly on that, so you'll want to check and find out. Most colleges will require that as well. But one thing that might help at this stage is that your students may want to take a CLEP test after they have taken one of their history years, because they may have learned that history year so thoroughly that they would be able to pass the college level exam for that and get their college credit without having to take it as a college class too. Also, you could sign up at a community college to take one of these classes like Western Civ or U.S. History, and that would count for history and college. And this is just a really good way for your students to get a little bit of a head start on college if they feel like they're going to be going to college, because oftentimes the Western Civ or the U.S. History classes are introductory, and that's a really easy, I don't want to say easy, they're not necessarily easy, but they're leveled at a way that a high schooler can pass them. I wanted to go ahead and read our scripture for today. There are 2 times that I was thinking of in scripture where it is obvious that the people were thankful for their records or their memorials. Joshua 4:4. So Joshua called together the 12 men he had appointed from the Israelites, 1 from each tribe, and said to them, "Go over before the ark of the Lord your God into the middle of the Jordan. Each of you is to take up a stone on his shoulder, according to the number of the tribes of the Israelites, to serve as a sign among you. In the future, when your children ask you, 'What do these stones mean?' tell them that the flow of the Jordan was cut off before the ark of the covenant of the Lord. When it crossed the Jordan, the waters of the Jordan were cut off. These stones are to be a memorial to the people of Israel forever." So here we see God telling Joshua and Joshua telling the people, get 12 stones out of the middle of this river and put them on the edge of the river. And when your kids ask you, why are there 12 stones sitting right here on the edge of this river? This is a chance for you to tell your kids about the faithfulness of God. And so the stones were a memorial or a landmark, a place for people to come and remember. And so that is a lot of what we have in history, is a chance for us to go and see places where something important happened. And we can say, our kids can ask us, why is this important? And it's a chance for us to tell them why it's important in American history. And possibly in your own family history, you will have your own landmarks like this. And it's a chance to give your kids a clue as to how God has been faithful to you. Okay, Esther 6. That night the king could not sleep, so he ordered the book of the Chronicles, the record of his reign, to be brought in and read to him. It was found recorded there that Mordecai had exposed Bigthana and Teresh, two of the king's officers who guarded the doorway, who had conspired to assassinate King Xerxes. If you have not read the whole story of Esther, you should, and you will recognize that these verses are a key turning point in the story. The king can't sleep, so he has his records, his own history of his own reign brought to him. And during that time, he realizes that he has never honored Mordecai for something that he has done for him. So in this situation, a history book was a key item in the plot of the story of Esther. And there are other times in the Bible where somebody's records, history records, have made a difference in the outcome of a situation. So I think that there's support in the Bible and in God's word for teaching history and for remembering how God has acted on the behalf of his people. And especially if we want to trace God's hand through history, we can start to see how different civilizations were brought to a certain point for God's glory. And so that's very exciting to be able to weave the biblical narrative in with the history narrative and start to show your kids how this all connects. Okay, if you need to take a break, this is a good time because I've got quite a few pages of resources to go over and there's going to be lots to learn. So, all right. The first resource to show you is called Biblioplan. And this was my favorite because I'm so eclectic. I don't like sticking with anything. And I've told you that before. This is an older version of Biblioplan. The one that is out now is more complicated. So I'm not really sure how it compares. But if you can get a hold of the older one, this is what it looks like. It gives you, this is for America and the world, 1600 to 1850. So it would be year 3 in the history rotation. It gives you 36 weeks of topics that you're going to study to get a thorough overview of this year of history. The next few pages happen to be resources telling you what books you can look for and what books you can buy and what reading level they would be at. And then the last part of it is an actual weekly overview assignment sheet. And it tells you 3 different lessons that you can do throughout the week to teach you about, this one is about the 17th century, specifically Japan and China. And so everything that you read that week will be about Japan and China in the 17th century. And it gives you all sorts of different books that you can look up and some writing topics and what you can look for on a timeline or a map. So I really liked this because it was a springboard for me to use for my own ideas for teaching my kids. But the organization was done ahead of time for me. All right, the next one is Sunlight. I did not bring any of that down with me. Sunlight is the Christian version. Bookshark is the secular version. But both of them come with a giant 3-ring binder, like this thick, 2 or 3 times this. And it's got all the information that you need. And it's got the book plan laid out for you, what to read, which days, and discussion questions ready to go for you. So they have done a ton of work on an instructor guide, as well as finding books that help teach what you want to learn for that particular year. My Father's World is similar. I didn't bring that down with me either. I never actually used My Father's World, but I have several friends who did, and they all enjoyed it. So My Father's World is another one that is similarly planned out like Sunlight. Beautiful Feet would be similar to that as well. I've only used that once or twice, but they give you a list of really good books to use in teaching a certain history year, and then discussion questions to go along with it. I would probably use more of those questions as just a dialogue with your kid, not necessarily a question answer for writing out in cursive with full sentences. That might be a little over the top. Okay, Story of the World. This is a 4-volume set that is put out by Susan Wise Bauer. They are easy to read chapters that just kind of give you an overview of that time period. They do come with activity books that are bigger and also tests if you decide that that's something you want to do for your kids. But most chapters are pretty short. They come with a little map. This one is called Revolution in the Americas, and it talks about the Mexican Revolution for a few pages. and then it goes over to World War I for a few pages. So it's not thorough because there's not any way you could cover World War I in 3 pages and say you've taught everything that you need to teach. But it's really good for giving kids a basic understanding of the chronological order of history. So these are very widely used. I would even have a set of these for my shelf, even if you weren't using it as your main curriculum. Okay, the next page, History Revealed. That is by Diana Waring. This is more thorough. She divides hers into 9 units. And this happens to be the teacher's guide, so it looks a little bit different. Her 9 units are, like, this is the one for Romans, Reformers, and Revolutionaries. So it would be the 2nd year of the history. Actually, she divides her years into 3 instead of 4. So this would be mostly the 2nd and the 3rd year of that history rotation. She likes to divide it up so that kids have a chance to show their expertise in a learning style or a multiple intelligence. So a lot of the activities that she gives for them to do would go along with a student's particular bent, something that they would really enjoy researching, not just another project that they have to do and they don't care about it. So she's big on learning styles and multiple intelligences, and she's got a lot of great projects, including a cooking project for every unit. So sometimes we would do the cooking project as part of our history study. Okay, the next one is Truth Quest. These are very in-depth. She basically gives a discussion of a certain topic and gives you ideas about why the ideas would be on one side versus another side. And then also gives you some resources where you can read further and dig in and learn more about a certain topic. So there's a lot of reading in this one, but it's really good for older kids as you're trying to dig into the philosophies of the time and how the people living in that culture would have been looking for truth, if they found truth, if they missed truth. Very, very in-depth. I did not bring anything down by Knotgrass History. I also have not used that curriculum, but I've seen it and it's fantastic. And it relies more on primary source documents, which are very important when you're learning to be a historian, that you actually go as far back as you can and as close to the original participants in history. So for example, if you were studying the Civil War and you had a letter that a soldier had written home from the Civil War, that would be a primary source document. If you have a person who was studying the Civil War and quoted 4 words out of that Civil War letter, that would not be a primary source document because this person is interpreting the primary source document according to his own theory and opinions. Most textbooks that you have, including pretty much everything that I have here, would not be primary source documents. But if they would include a copy of something that was a primary source document, then you could start to think like a historian. So that is why I emphasized Knotgrass History as a possible curriculum, because it's really good at including that and helping kids understand why primary source documents are important. Okay, the next one is A History of Us. This is by Joy Hakim, and she's put out 10 books that looks like this, plus an 11th book, which is a guide or a teacher's idea book. So these are written more like magazine articles where you just have some short page of text. This is called A Man Who Didn't Do As His Neighbors Did. And so it just gives you, it's actually only 4 pages long, but along the edges you've got some sidebars and some captions. And so it doesn't really feel like you're reading a history textbook. It feels like you're reading a couple short magazine articles. And it's just lighthearted and fun. So this is all about United States history though. So this would only apply to years 3 and 4 in history curriculum's rotation. Okay, the next one is Uncle Josh's Outline Map Book. This one is just a great book to have on your shelf because you can make copies of this to help your kids study geography. And it's just a way of them being able to make a copy, color, add rivers, the names of rivers, capitals, that kind of thing. So this also comes on a CD-ROM if you wanted to print them out of your computer instead of using a copy machine. This one is called The Ultimate Geography and Timeline Guide. This is written more for parents and teachers to know how to teach history and geography. So you can use it as a curriculum, but it's not already scripted for you. It's more like a resource book where you can get lots of ideas for teaching history and geography, but you're still going to have to do more of the work for the unit study on your own. Okay, next page. Maps, charts, and graphs. I didn't bring this one down. It's buried somewhere upstairs. It's like just a workbook that helps kids learn map skills. And we use our phones and GPS tools more often now than we use a workbook and an actual physical map, like a road map. But it would still be a good idea for your kids to study that at least once in their 12 years with you. Next one is A Child's History of the World. This one, the author wrote this in 1924, so you're going to be missing an entire century of U.S. history. However, he does go back to the beginning of the world, and it's written in a very conversational tone to children, and it kind of just gives them an overview of the history of the whole world. So even though it's missing the last century, you can still gain a whole lot of it, and the kids really enjoy listening to these stories because he just writes as if it's a giant story. So this was a good book. There are a couple chapters that I disagree with his worldview, but I either changed it when I was reading it out loud or we just stopped and talked about the differences in worldview at that point. He also has a book called A Child's History of Art and Architecture. And I really appreciated this because I wanted my kids to get a little flavor of architecture when we talked about cathedrals and learning a little bit more of the terminology that goes with that. And so I really appreciated his book, just kind of giving you the basics of architecture in all different types of world history. All right, The Landmark History of the American People. This is actually volume 1 and volume 2 put together. If you look at my Amazon links, that's actually 2 separate volumes that have been revised, but you can still find this one pretty cheap. And it's he really gets at the substance of history as to looking for bigger themes, not just the strict facts, but kind of the underlying theme that went with it. So for example, part 1 of the second volume is called The Go-Getters, and he kind of lumps together cattlemen and cowboys, rock oil to light up the world, city goods for country customers. And he kind of puts it together so that you can kind of see the impact that different decisions had on history. So I really liked this book. It is a little hard to read. I tried reading it aloud to probably early elementary and they weren't into it. You kind of have to wait till they're about 7th or 8th grade and then either assign it to them and discuss it or read it with them and discuss it. That usually works better. Dover coloring books, I didn't bring any down with me, but they do have a large collection of helps and coloring books that go along with all sorts of topics of history. So just be aware of that and look it up if that's something you're interested in. Geography games and puzzles. I didn't bring these down either, but puzzles are really good for maps because the puzzles can be cut in the same exact shape as a country, and your kids can start to be familiar with the edges, the outlines, the orientation of the pieces. And then we have 2 games that we really enjoyed playing, 10 Days in Europe and Trans-America. And both of those game boards are set up like a map so that when you're playing it, you're getting more and more familiar with the countries and the geography of Europe and of America. The next one there I didn't bring down either, but National Geographic are those old vintage yellow bordered magazines that every grandparents seem to have in their home. And some of them even had maps stuck in them. So if you can find them or if you're interested in them, they're very in-depth reading, probably high school, college age. but you can still get some great resources out of them if you can find a couple. U.S. history map activities and world history map activities. I didn't bring these down either, but I did rely heavily on the world history map activities for my high schoolers because it gives you a chance to, the person who put together the materials would give you a map to color, and then he would give you significant things to color or outline on that map that gave you some more information about why history was happening the way it was happening based on the geography of that place. So that was really helpful to me to learn, and my kids endured it as well. Google Earth we've already talked about. I would highly encourage you as the parent to look it up to see what's available and how you could use that in your studies. The Story of the USA. This is a book. There are actually 4 workbooks that look like this, and they're pretty simple to read. I would do this anywhere from 4th to 8th grade. They just have like 2 pages to read, and then they start giving you questions to answer based on that reading. And so you can use it as a language arts assignment because it's reading comprehension, or you can use it as history because it's all about different history topics and it goes in order. So there's 4 books. This one happens to be America Becomes a Giant. I liked using those for my older kids as they got more independent because I could just tell them, go do chapter 9 in this book. And then I would know that they would have a solid foundation on studying something further. Okay, history games. We like Professor Noggins. These are very simple games that seem like trivia, but they are related to history. So there's a card like this, and then on the back is 3 easy questions and 3 hard questions. And the kids roll the dice. And if it's a 1, it says Marco Polo was the first European to visit China, true or false? The answer is false. And then if you got it right, in our family, we have the kid who got it right keep the card. And then at the end, we count how many cards each kid has to figure out the winner. There's over 40 Professor Noggins games, and none of them feel difficult because you might get an easy one, you might get a hard one. But either way, you're learning some history, or you're reviewing history at least. I also put down the game Risk. If you have ever played Risk, it is basically a world map, and every competitor is trying to conquer the world. So just playing Risk for an hour can help you see how a power-hungry dictator might feel and what might motivate him to keep on going to try to conquer the world. Next one are Uncle Eric books, and they also have accompanying workbooks called Blue Stocking Guides. Uncle Eric is really Richard Maybury, but he wrote his books in a way that it looks like a letter to his nephew Chris. And so every chapter he's writing a little letter talking about something that would be over our heads most of the time, but he makes it more understandable for, I would say, anywhere from 5th to college age. Some would probably still be too difficult for 5th graders, but if you have a very interested student who's very interested in politics or economics, these are very good. And actually, for me as an adult too, there's some things I learned by reading those that I had no idea. Okay, I've skipped a book. I'm not sure which page this was on, but Mystery of History. She's done a great job of pulling together a resource that you can use with all ages. So for example, this would be, sorry, that's just a quarterly overview. Here's lesson on Samson. So she interweaves biblical history with chronological history from other parts of the world. This lesson happens to be about Samson. It's this much reading, but then she has 3 activities, one for younger students, one for middle students, and one for older students. And then later, she has a quiz and word search and things like that. So it's kind of traditional school-based, but also with hands-on activities. It makes it more fun and interesting. So Mystery of History, I'm sorry I skipped it. And then back when we were talking about the mapping activities that you could do with worksheets, you would want to get something called a historical atlas of the world, because a historical atlas shows you the way that the countries used to be, well, all the way back to, here's the Ottoman Empire in the 17th century. So if you were learning history about this, it would make more sense to study a map from that time, not a map of what the countries look like today. So that is why it would be valuable to have a historical atlas of the world. You can also find that information on the internet, but sometimes it's easier just to find it in a book. Okay, a few other suggestions before we finish. Geocaching is like a treasure hunt using a GPS device. And lots of people in America and even the world are in on this. It's an app that you can download and sign up for and get an account. And then you find out where you want to go treasure hunting. And then somebody somewhere has left a geocache for you to find. So it might just be a very tiny little thing attached to a sign somewhere magnetically, or it could be something that you dig out from under a hollow log. It's hard to say exactly what it would be, but geocaching is like just something fun to do with your kids or your family. And then you can also hide things for other people to find if they're geocaching in your neighborhood. Reenactments, landmarks, and museums. Any chance that you have to take your kid to a museum, a national landmark, or a historic local landmark, or go to a reenactment, like specifically a Civil War reenactment, you are going to learn things because your kids are going to ask questions. Now, when you get to be around 5th to 10th grade, museums sound very boring to kids. So you'll need to pick and choose carefully, depending on your own kids' interest and how much interest you can generate for them. But I would highly, highly encourage you to do this, even if it means going out of your way or taking an extra day trip. Kids remember history that they see, and it may spark an interest that you wouldn't be able to spark with a textbook. So try to find things like that in your neighborhood if you can. Documentaries, I recommend documentaries over movies because movie writers seem to be able to take some license and add in plot points that may or may not have actually happened. And documentaries are a little bit more presenting the facts. If there is a theory that a historian has come up with, it's generally going to be presented as a theory and what supports it. But they don't necessarily have as much license to go off on a tangent and, add a kid to the family or take out a kid from the family or skip over something that just didn't fit with the plot. Movie writers seem to change stories a little bit more than documentaries. We've already talked about primary source documents, why it's so important to find something that is as close to the original involving a person who was actually there. That's always going to be more historically accurate. Even if that person, let's say, had a bad opinion of what was happening, they're still going to be more likely to give you clues as to what life was like in that situation. So primary source documents, the internet has brought that into our home more than any other generation. So take advantage of that if you can. Consider studying current events because today's current events are tomorrow's history. Your kids are always living through history that they're going to tell about their kids and grandkids about. So help them understand and make sense of what are the ingredients that are going into current events today. Why is, the Middle East a hot spot? Or what promoted that riot that you saw in the news? Those kind of things. Those are things you can talk about with them and help them to understand in their own mind, even if it's very complicated and we don't even understand it ourselves. Just giving them the background information helps them feel less confused. I did put in some resources that are Christian, World Kids, World Teen, and World Watch that you might want to check into. Those are all subscription, monthly fee based. So it costs money, but it might be something that you do maybe only the year that you're studying modern world history. But it's up to you. Project Gutenberg is an online, it's a website. It has full text of anything that's copyright has expired. So anything that has gone into the public domain is free game, and Project Gutenberg may have put it out there for free. So this doesn't help you necessarily in the modern era, but there are a lot of biographies and autobiographies from the 1800s that you would be able to find the complete text for free through Project Gutenberg. So if you're studying like Daniel Boone and you want to read a biography of Daniel Boone, chances are you're going to be able to find one of the older versions of a book that was written very shortly after Daniel Boone died, and it's probably available for free on Project Gutenberg. It might be very old ways of talking, but actually might be more entertaining for your kids because it hasn't been changed over time to try to reflect some of the things that people may have liked or not liked about Daniel Boone. You might get a more accurate snapshot of who he was and what he did if you can find an old biography of him. Okay, and the last thing to talk about is worldview. We've kind of talked about it already, that worldview is the way that you see the world, and it changes based on what your culture is and where you were raised and who raised you and what country you're from and what religion you have and what your philosophy is. So when you're studying people of the past or people from other places, you need to be aware that their worldview is different than your own. And again, this is something that's very hard for little kids to understand because they're still thinking that everybody is like them. They still have this big view of themselves. And so it's hard for them to take on other people's viewpoints. So worldview is something you kind of have to work into, but by the time they're in high school, they should definitely have this idea that other people see the world differently from them and that they can acknowledge this and kind of take steps to lessen the gap. Not necessarily that they have to believe what everybody else is believing, but that they can reach out and be a bridge of understanding to other people from other cultures, even if they don't necessarily agree with them. We have used the resource I put in there, the Young Historian's Guide to Worldview, and it was really good. I recommend that. Also, Chuck Colson had a radio ministry many years ago that talked about worldview, and you can still find some of his stuff online if you wanted to do an in-depth study. All right, week 24, next week, we're going to be discussing a book called Teaching from Rest by Sarah Mackenzie. I hope that you'll be able to join me for that. We are getting really close to the end of our 6-month countdown, and I bet you're feeling really ready to homeschool. So keep at it, and I'll see you next week.